back to Fast Freddy RC, and today we're going to start the build process for the Ford Bronco 2021 on the CC02 chassis. Now, alongside this vehicle, I'm also building a CC01, which if you're interested in seeing the build process there, you can click this link. And the whole idea was to build them in tandem so that we can really get a sense of how each vehicle was built and see what the improvements and everything else were when building a CC02. And I mean, it is considerably different to a CC01, which you'll be able to see as we go along. Now, I think what we'll do is we will just start. So if we turn this, we're going to see that step one is charging the battery pack. Now, I have to tell you that I'm not going to be doing that. I don't see the point because we're nowhere near ready to do anything that's going to require checking any of the electronics. So, you know, you can do this now, but I won't be. I'm going to wait because, you know, depending on your skill level, this vehicle may take longer or shorter amount of time, so it's not really necessary. So we're going to skip over step one, and we're going to move into step two, which is working on the gears. Now, here's an interesting thing. For a first step, there are a couple of interesting changes. You can see that they're showing you the standard gear ratio, and this is how you would build it if you were doing that. Or if you want to go with the low speed gear ratio, there are different gears and some of them are being placed in different places depending on what you're looking for. Now in my case, I'm going to build this with the low speed gear ratio because I want this to be more of a trail truck and a climbing truck. And I've built the CC01 with the locking rear differential. Well, on the CC02, you can lock both the front and the rear. But for the most part, we're talking the drivetrain itself here, which is attached to the motor. So I want to go with the low speed gear ratio. So here are all of the parts. I've already pulled them together, and you can see we've got our bearings that we're replacing all of the plastic and brass bushings and some of our driveline, and we've got some of our gears. So I'll set this up and we will build this gear setup in the low speed gear ratio setting. So if we take a look at the top one, the first thing they're talking about is gear shaft B, and we have this shaft, the MA16, going into the gear, the GB2, which is this one here. Now that is the same setup as whether you're doing the low speed gear or the high. So let's just do that for now. So you can see that they're not showing you putting on any grease at this point. We're going to grab our pin. We're going to grab the smaller pin that's going to go in there. And you can see that based on the shape of that, this is going to go through, and that little pin is basically locking the gear in place. Just as long as you pull it down. So that's in place and it's ready to go. So I'm just going to put this to the side for a second. You can see that the next step is they're showing you greasing the ends, and you're going to put a GB1 gear, which is a 26 tooth gear. In our case, we want the smaller gear. We want the GB3, which you can see there are the two gears, and we don't want this one now. We want this one to be here, and you can see it's got the same idea. There's a pin, and then this is going to sit on top of that. So if we grab our other gear that we had here, we're going to stick that pin through, and we're going to grab our smaller 20 tooth gear and slide that on, because you can see where the pin is going to sit. Slide that on that way so that the gear looks like that. So that would be when you're working on the low speed gear setting. Now you can see that they want some grease at the end, and you've got the two bearings, and then we're going to put a E-clip on the end to hold this all together. So because this is on the inside of the gearbox, there are times when I find I don't grease up the bearings. I mean, it shows you that these are plastic bushings, but because we're into the driveline, I am going to grease this up. So we're going to grab our grease out of here, which is the one that came in the kit, and we'll see how this goes. I'm not entirely sure whether that tube of grease is going to be enough for the whole kit, but we'll see. So I'll just get that out and we'll grease this up and then put the bearings on and put the E-clip on the end. So now that we've got our grease open, I'm going to, whoops, put a little bit on there. And we grab one of our bearings, and that's just going to sit on there just like that. And then if I hold that, we're going to do the same thing, because right at the end we've got the bearings going to sit there. And we'll put the bearing on there, and you can see how that's going to sit. And now we have an E-clip that's going to fit onto there as well. So if we grab our E-clip, that's going to sit right like that. So we'll grab our pliers, grab it by the end, and the end on that. And on it goes. So there is one of our gear setups now. So that's this part done when setting it up as a low speed gear ratio. So now that gear shaft B is complete, let's work on the other shaft that's going to require a change if you are using the low speed gear ratio. So with this one, you can see in the original, it's going to use the 20-tooth gear. Well, we already used that on this side. So we are now going to be putting the 26-tooth gear onto gear shaft C, where it would have been the 20-tooth if we were doing standard gear ratio. So if we were to grab our pin, which is the longer one, the MA17, you can see that there's going to need to be an E-clip. So let's get that on right away. Because once that's on, we can do everything else much easier. So if we look at that, there we go. So we've got our E-clip on there and intact. So you can see that this gear requires the pin. So we're going to put the pin through that shaft. Then we're going to grab our gear and we're going to slide that on, make sure that that goes inside. So now it is on tight, and you can see that they want you to grease up both sides, because one side is going to have the bearing and the other side's going to have the bearing. So we'll go ahead and do that. So we know that the bearing is pretty much sitting right by where the E-clip is on this side. So I'll just move it around, get the grease on there, and we'll grab a bearing and get it on there. So now we know that that bearing is in the right place. And then on this side, it's just on the other side of the hole. Well, we'll just give a little bit of grease there. And we'll grab our bearing and we'll put it on. So that is the finished gear shaft C with now the 26 tooth on this one. So that part now is complete. So what we have left is gear shaft A. And you can see that the way this is going to go, we've got this little gear right here, which actually is a metal gear, and it comes in this bag, and you can see that it's a bit of a different look for sure. And this is the one that's going to use the MA14, which is that smaller shaft that's going to hold it in place. So first of all, let's grab this and we'll put the pin in, so you can see that the way this is going to go, the shaft itself is pretty balanced. I don't think it's going to matter which way you put it around. No, it's the same. So it's not going to matter which way you turn this around. So we're going to grab our pin and our shaft. I'm going to stick that little shaft into there. You can see that this is going to slide on that way. So we're going to take this, slide that through, and it goes on at that end. And they want you to grease the end here, which we'll do. And we're going to stick a bearing on there. Make sure that that stays together. And I'll just turn it around. You can see that the bearing is going to go on the other side of this gear. So if I was to hold this, got enough on there. I don't want to overdo it. Slide that through. And now the gear setup looks like that. So that part is done. So now we've got gear shaft B complete, which was all of this, but we replaced it with this. We've got gear shaft A complete, which is the one we just did, and that makes no difference which way you build it, whether it's the standard gear ratio or the low. And then we've got gear shaft C, which we've now completed as well. So we've got, there's how gear shaft B should look, there's how gear shaft C should look, and there's how gear shaft A should look. So now that we've got all of that complete, step 2 is done. So now we can move on to step 3, which is working on the gearbox and adding all of those gears we just built into that gearbox.